The laughter of children echoed across Sycamore Park, the kind of carefree joy that made parents linger on benches long after their coffee had gone cold. It was the first week of spring in the small town of Waverly, Ohio. After a long winter, families returned to the park like migrating birds, ready to shake off the frost with sunshine, swings, and soft-serve ice cream from the red cart near the parking lot. The old playground had been a landmark here for generations. Its rusting metal frame, chipping blue paint, and creaky swing set were more nostalgic than safe, which was exactly why the city council finally approved plans to replace it. New funding. New design. A safer place for the kids. No one could have guessed what was buried just 6 feet below. Monday morning began like any other. City workers arrived with hard hats and coffee thermoses, setting up yellow tape and unloading equipment. The kids had been warned the area would be off-limits for a few weeks, but that didn't stop a few wide-eyed onlookers from gathering behind the temporary fencing. Waverly was small. News, even minor things like park construction, traveled fast. Miguel Torres, a veteran construction worker in his early 50s, stood at the edge of the pit the backhoe had carved into the soft ground. Something about the soil felt strange. Not in texture, but in silence. As the sun rose higher and workers peeled away layer after layer of earth, Miguel squinted at something sticking out near the base of the swing set's concrete support. At first, he thought it was a tree root. Then the digging paused. The air changed. Miguel stepped closer, crouching, brushing away a layer of dirt with a gloved hand. The shape that emerged wasn't wood. It wasn't rock either. It was a small, brittle human jawbone. Within hours, Sycamore Park was flooded, not with children, but with cruisers, news vans, and crime scene tape. The yellow swings swayed gently in the breeze as if disturbed by ghosts. Detective Sarah Linden stood at the edge of the excavation site, arms crossed, brows furrowed. She wasn't a stranger to death. 20 years on the force hardened you in ways you didn't always see until later. But children, that was different. You said it was under the swing set, she asked one of the forensics officers. Yeah. Right under the main pole. Whoever did this didn't want the body found anytime soon. Sarah turned her head, scanning the faces of the onlookers now gathering just beyond the caution tape. Curious eyes, whispering voices, some gasping, others recording on their phones. Beneath her calm exterior, Sarah's mind had already started connecting dots. Waverly hadn't had a murder in years. But 15 years ago, in this very town, a 5-year-old girl named Madeline Harper vanished after playing in this park. Vanished without a trace. Madeline's case had been cold so long, it lived in boxes now. Case files. Faded photographs. A lone pink shoe that was never claimed. Her mother, Elaine Harper, still lived in Waverly, though she no longer came to the park. Not since the search dogs failed to pick up her daughter's scent past the edge of the playground. As the forensic team began carefully removing the remains from the ground, Detective Linden's chest tightened. The small jawbone. Fragments of a tiny skull. Dirt-stained remnants of what looked like a child's sundress. She didn't want to say it out loud yet. Not until the lab confirmed it. But in her gut, she knew. Madeline Harper was coming home. Not alive. But not lost anymore. Across town, Elaine Harper sat at her kitchen table, stirring a cup of tea she hadn't touched. The local news was already running the headline. Child's remains found in Waverly Park, possible link to 2009 missing girl case. She didn't cry. She just sat there, eyes locked on the television, hand frozen around the handle of her cup. For 15 years, Elaine had prayed for answers. She just never thought they'd come in the form of bones. Elaine Harper didn't speak to reporters. She never had, not once in 15 years. Not when they called her daughter just another runaway. Not when the police quietly scaled back the search. Not when the town eventually moved on. But today, the day bones were pulled from beneath the very ground where her daughter once played, the silence felt suffocating. The knock at the door came just after sunset. Elaine knew it would. She stood slowly, her movements stiff, like her joints had aged years in a single afternoon. When she opened the door, she found Detective Sarah Linden standing there, hat in hand, the way officers do when they're about to say something nobody ever wants to hear. Sarah had expected grief, wailing, maybe even collapse. But instead, Elaine's face was still. "I knew it," Elaine said, her voice like dry leaves. "I've always known she never left that park." Sarah's eyes softened. "The remains haven't been officially identified yet, but we found a child's dress buried with them. Pink and white stripes. Small size. There's a strong chance." Elaine nodded. It was her favorite dress. She wore it that day. A long silence settled between them. "I'll need a DNA sample," Sarah said gently. Elaine reached for a plastic bag already sitting on the hallway table. Inside was a baby tooth, Madeline's, stored in an old envelope from years ago. "I've kept this," she said. "Just in case." Sarah accepted the bag without a word. As she turned to leave, Elaine added, "You're going to find out who did this, aren't you?" Sarah met her eyes. "Yes. I won't stop until I do." Back at the station, the case file came down from the archives. It was thick with dead ends. Madeline Harper, age 5. Disappeared May 14, 2009. Last seen on the swing set at Sycamore Park. Witness statements were sparse. Elaine had taken a phone call just 10 feet away on a nearby bench. In those 2 minutes, her daughter vanished. No screams. No struggle. Just, gone. The police had scoured the park, the woods, nearby creeks. Volunteers combed miles. Drones. Dogs. Interviews. Nothing. There was no ransom call. No trace. And eventually, no leads. But now, with bones unearthed in the very soil she vanished from, Sarah saw something the original investigators hadn't. This wasn't random. Whoever did this knew the park. Knew the timing. Knew how to hide a body in plain sight, beneath a place children played every day. Meanwhile, word had spread fast in Waverly. Small towns run on whispers. And today, those whispers turned into wildfire. At O'Malley's diner, the usuals gathered, eyes glued to the TV in the corner. The waitress, Tina, leaned over to refill coffee cups, her voice hushed. "You think it's her? The Harper girl?" "Has to be," said Joe, a retired mechanic. "Who else would it be?" "Could have been someone else buried there," another man offered, but his voice lacked conviction. Behind the counter, a man quietly stirred his soup without looking up. His name was Rick Daly, a former city maintenance worker. He had helped install the new water lines near the park back in 2009. Quiet. Kept to himself. Fired years ago for drinking on the job. He hadn't said a word all day. But his hand trembled just slightly as he brought the spoon to his mouth. At the precinct, Sarah sat alone in the evidence room, reviewing photos from the dig site. Among the fragments of bone and fabric, something caught her eye. A small metal object. Rusted. Nearly missed. She zoomed in. A charm. From a necklace. Half of a heart, with letters faintly visible. Best FR. Best friends. Sarah's breath caught. She remembered a note in the file. Madeline had a matching necklace with her best friend, Emily Knowles. They were 5, inseparable. Little girls who swore they'd be best friends forever. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed. Now 20 years old, Emily Knowles lived 2 towns over. When Sarah arrived, Emily was visibly shaken. I didn't know you'd still be looking," she said. "We weren't. But now we are." Sarah showed her the charm. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I had the other half. I wore it for years after she went missing. Until I couldn't anymore." Sarah studied her. "You were there that day? At the park?" Emily nodded slowly. "My mom took me home early. I didn't see anything. I wish I had." Sarah believed her. but something gnawed at her gut. Emily looked down. "Can I ask something? Do you think it was someone we knew?" Sarah paused. "Maybe." Emily whispered, "I think it had to be." As darkness settled over Waverley, the playground remained surrounded by flashing lights and police barriers. And beneath the ground, now disturbed, the truth had begun to rise. Whoever buried Madeline beneath the swing set believed she'd be forgotten. But bones remember. And now, so would the town. The next morning, Detective Sarah Linden stared at her whiteboard, now cluttered with names, dates, and a map of the park with red pushpins. 15 years of silence had erupted into noise, calls from retired officers, messages from town residents, and memories long buried resurfacing like ghosts. But one name had stuck out. Rick Daly. Former city worker. Terminated for misconduct in 2010. He had access to the park, especially during the weeks following Madeline's disappearance when the city had ordered maintenance work, including the installation of new piping beneath the swing set. Sarah picked up the phone. "Pull his file," she told Officer Bradley. "I want every detail. Who he worked with. When. Where." Meanwhile, across town, Rick Daly sat in his dim, cramped living room. Cigarette smoke lingered in the air, curling like ghosts above his head. The news was still playing. Investigation continues into the discovery of remains at Sycamore Park. Rick turned off the TV. His hand trembled again. He hadn't set foot in the park since the summer of 2009. He remembered the digging. The way they told him to pour new concrete to stabilize the swings. He remembered the hole that was already there. And he remembered the warning. "You didn't see anything. You didn't hear anything. Understand?" Rick had been drunk the night he got the call, a voice he knew but never named. A voice tied to someone he never thought would ask him to keep a secret like that. But it wasn't just a secret. It was a grave. And now, it was speaking. Back at the station, DNA results arrived. The bones beneath the swing set were confirmed to be Madeline Harper's. Sarah stood in front of the board, the results in her hand, her heart heavy. Closure for Elaine, yes. But peace? Not yet. It wasn't enough to know Madeline had died. She needed to know who killed her, and why. Later that afternoon, Sarah drove out to Elaine's house. She stepped onto the porch, holding the printed results, but Elaine didn't need to read them. "I felt it," she said quietly, opening the door before Sarah even knocked. They sat in the living room, silence stretching like old wallpaper. "She's really gone," Elaine finally whispered. "And she was there, all this time, just feet from where I sat today." Sarah leaned forward. "We're reopening the case in full. And I need to ask, is there anyone you suspected? Anyone who acted strange after she disappeared?" Elaine's eyes flickered. "There was a man," she said. "Maintenance worker. Kept coming around after. Always looking at the swings. Never said much. Rick, something." Sarah nodded. "Rick Daly." Elaine looked up. "You think he did it?" "I don't know. But I think he knows who did." That night, Sarah pulled up to Rick Daly's trailer just outside Waverly's limits. She parked, killed the engine, and waited a moment. No lights on. No movement. She knocked once. Twice. "Rick Daly? Waverly PD. We need to talk." The door creaked open slightly. The chain lock still fastened. Rick's sunken face peeked through. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched. "I don't got anything to say," he muttered. Sarah stayed calm. "I think you do. I think you've been carrying this for a long time." He hesitated. She added, "You don't have to protect him anymore." Rick swallowed hard. His eyes darted toward the ground. "I didn't bury her," he whispered. "But you saw who did." He looked away. "I helped pour the concrete. But the hole was already there. I thought it was weird. Real weird. But when I asked, I was told to shut up." Told if I talked, I'd regret it. Who told you that, Rick? His lips parted, then closed. Was it someone in the city? Sarah pressed. Someone in uniform? He stepped back, unhooked the chain, and opened the door. Inside, the living room was cluttered, dark, and thick with cigarette smoke. Rick shuffled to a drawer and pulled out an old spiral notebook, yellowed with age. He held it out to Sarah. I wrote it down. All of it. Couldn't say it out loud, but I wrote it. Back then, I was drunk most days. But I knew I'd need this. Someday. Sarah opened the notebook. Names. Dates. Times. Sketches of the park. Notes about the night he got a call to come pour concrete at midnight. A voice he knew. A name written, not once, but 5 times on the same page. Paul Kendrick. Sarah's chest tightened. Paul Kendrick had been the Parks and Recreation Supervisor in 2009. He oversaw maintenance schedules, coordinated city workers, had access to all facilities, including the park. He retired in 2010. Quietly, without fanfare. Sarah looked up at Rick. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Rick's voice cracked. Because Kendrick, he wasn't alone that night. Sarah's breath hitched. Rick pointed to a name written in the margin, circled over and over again. Officer Mark Rayner. Detective Lyndon froze. Mark Rayner. Decorated. Beloved. Still serving. And once the lead officer on the Harper case. Detective Sarah Lyndon sat alone in her car outside the station, Rick Daly's notebook in her hands. The air felt heavier now, as if the truth itself carried a weight no one wanted to lift. Officer Mark Rayner. The name echoed like a warning bell in her mind. Rayner wasn't just any cop. He was a veteran of the force. Revered. Untouchable. He trained half the current department, and his commendations lined the hallway outside the chief's office like a shrine. He had led the search for Madeline. Comforted Elaine on the evening news. He'd promised justice. And now, his name was scribbled in a drunk city worker's old notebook, buried like the girl he was supposed to find. Sarah couldn't go to the chief. Not yet. Not without more. Waverly wasn't just a town. It was a machine, small, interconnected, and fiercely loyal to its own. Accusing someone like Rayner wouldn't be justice. It would be war. Later that evening, Sarah returned to her apartment and spread out copies of the original 2009 case file. Rayner's report stood out immediately. Search of Sycamore Park complete. No signs of recent ground disturbance. Area cleared. Sarah's eyes narrowed. The swing set had been installed 2 weeks after that report. And there had been maintenance scheduled that same week, the job Rick Daly claimed to have worked under Kendrick's direction. So why hadn't Rayner mentioned any of that? Because he didn't want anyone digging there. And now Sarah knew why. The next morning, Sarah walked into the station like nothing had changed. She nodded at Rayner, who stood by the coffee pot, laughing with 2 patrolmen. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, his uniform crisp, his badge gleaming. He smiled at her. Long night, detective. She forced a smile back. Always. He sipped his coffee. You know, this case, it's got people rattled. Sometimes I think it's better to let sleeping dogs lie. Sarah tilted her head. Is that what you think happened to Madeline? Just a sleeping dog? Rayner's jaw tightened for a split second. Barely noticeable, unless you were looking for it. She was a sweet girl, he said flatly. It's a damn shame. I did everything I could to find her. Sarah nodded, her gaze locked on his. But you didn't, she said. He didn't reply. That afternoon, Sarah met quietly with Officer Bradley, one of the few people on the force she fully trusted. Together, they cross-checked logs from 2009 and found something chilling. Kendrick had authorized an after-hours concrete pour on August 2nd. The work order had no listed reason. A surveillance footage from the supply yard showed Kendrick arriving after midnight. And the vehicle used? A patrol car. Checked out by Officer Rayner. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding. It was no longer a theory. It was a cover-up. She pulled out Rick Daly's notebook again and turned to the final page. It was shaky, nearly unreadable. But the last entry was dated just 2 weeks after Madeline's disappearance. He told me I didn't see a girl. Said she was trouble. Said her daddy had secrets. That if people found out what really happened, the whole town would break. Told me it was better this way. We're keeping the peace, Rick, he said. You're a good man for helping. I ain't good. I ain't good at all. Sarah reread the line. Her daddy had secrets. That night, she went to Elaine Harper's house again. The widow looked tired, as if knowing the truth might finally be close was more exhausting than not knowing at all. I need to ask you about Madeline's father, Sarah said gently. Elaine hesitated. What about him? Was there anything unusual going on back then? Anything he didn't want people to know? Elaine's eyes welled up. She looked away, then back at Sarah. He was having an affair, she whispered. With Paul Kendrick's wife. Sarah's breath caught. Are you saying Madeline might have known? Elaine nodded slowly. She saw them once. Told me about it. I was furious. Not at her, at him. I confronted him. He swore it was over, that he'd made a mistake. I never told anyone else. Sarah sat back, pieces clicking into place like a sinister puzzle. If Kendrick found out, if Rayner got involved to protect him, Madeline wasn't just a victim. She was a threat. The next morning, Sarah quietly filed a request to re-examine Kendrick's old personnel records. But before she could leave the building, she was called into the chief's office. He closed the door. Sarah, he said grimly, I just got a call from Internal Affairs. She blinked. What? They said someone filed a complaint. Claimed you were harassing a retired city employee and spreading rumors about a decorated officer. She stood, heart pounding. This is retaliation. Rayner's covering himself. The chief looked down at his desk. I don't want to believe that. But if you push this without solid proof, you're going to be the one under investigation. Sarah stepped closer. I have proof. Just not all of it. Yet. The chief sighed. Then get it fast. Or drop it. Because if you're wrong, it's your badge. That night, Sarah drove out to Paul Kendrick's property, a crumbling farmhouse on the edge of town. He hadn't answered her calls, and when she knocked, no one came to the door. She stepped around the side of the house, and froze. The barn light was on. She crept closer, hand on her holstered weapon. Inside, Kendrick sat on an overturned bucket, staring at an old photograph in his hands, a picture of his wife, now long gone, and a little girl in pigtails swinging at Sycamore Park. He looked up. I knew you'd come, he said, voice rough like gravel. You digging up ghosts, detective? I'm after the living ones, she replied. You want to tell me what happened? Or do I have to let IA take you in handcuffs? Kendrick laughed bitterly. You think I buried that little girl? No. But I let it happen. And that makes me just as guilty. Sarah stepped closer. Who did it, Paul? Kendrick's eyes burned with old pain. She saw me. And she told her father. He threatened to go public, to destroy my life. I was drunk that night, furious, but I didn't kill her. Mark did. Sarah's blood ran cold. Kendrick continued. She'd run off after the fight. Mark found her by the park. He said she was crying, said she needed to be quiet. Said she wouldn't stop screaming. He hit her. Too hard. And when she didn't get up, he called me. Sarah was silent. He said we had to protect our reputations. Said no one would believe the truth anyway. Said it was for the good of the town. And I poured the concrete. He looked down at the photo again. I see her face every night. Detective Sarah Linden walked out of Kendrick's barn with her recorder still running, the weight of his confession pressing into her ribs like a vice. The night was silent, no traffic, no wind. Just the echo of her own heartbeat and the ghost of a girl who had waited 16 years for someone to finally listen. Madeline Harper wasn't just forgotten. She was buried by the very people sworn to protect her. And now the truth was fighting to rise. Back at the precinct, Sarah uploaded the recording to 2 encrypted drives and sent one to Officer Bradley with a simple message. If I disappear, release this. She didn't trust Rainer. Not anymore. Maybe she never should have. The man had built his entire career on justice, but underneath that, he had crafted a shield of silence. He had lied, manipulated, killed. And Sarah knew he wouldn't hesitate to protect that secret again. The next morning, the Waverly Gazette's front page featured a single headline. Breaking, remains confirmed as Madeline Harper, case reopened. The community was stunned. Grief resurfaced like a wound torn open. Elaine Harper was quietly taken in by family out of town, shielded from reporters and camera crews. The town mourned, again. But this time, they mourned with knowledge. Sarah made her way into the station and found Rainer waiting by her desk, a cup of coffee in each hand. He held one out. I figured you'd be tired. She didn't take it. You were there that night, weren't you? Rainer froze. The smile faded from his face. Sarah lowered her voice. Kendrick confessed. Said you called him. Said you were the one who hit her. Rainer looked around the room, then stepped closer, voice low and calm. You don't know what you're talking about. Sarah's eyes burned into his. I know everything. There was a pause. Then he said, so softly it was nearly inaudible. Be careful what you dig up, detective. Sometimes the ground doesn't want to let go. Sarah filed an official request for Rainer's suspension pending investigation. The chief, visibly shaken, agreed, but warned her to tread carefully. The town was divided. Half believed Sarah was a hero. The other half saw her as a troublemaker disrupting the legacy of a good man. That evening, Sarah drove back to Sycamore Park. The swing set had been removed. The yellow police tape fluttered weakly in the breeze, like the last breath of a lie unraveling. She crouched near the concrete pit where the bones were found, now filled with nothing but dust and memory. She whispered aloud, I found you, Maddie. I'm sorry it took so long. Then her phone rang. It was Officer Bradley. Sarah, you need to see this. Back at the station, Bradley handed her an envelope. Inside were old letters, correspondence from 2009 between Chief Daniels, Rainer, and Kendrick. Most were mundane, but one stood out. Asterisk mark. If there's even a chance that girl saw something, we need to make sure this doesn't spread. I don't care if you have to scare Daly or clean it up yourself. Waverly can't survive another scandal. We protect our own. You remember that. Asterisk. It was signed. D. Sarah's chest tightened. Chief Daniels. Her boss. The man who'd warned her to tread carefully. He hadn't just covered it up. He orchestrated it. Now Sarah understood. This wasn't about one girl. It was about a system built on rot. The chief, Kendrick, Rainer, they weren't outliers. They were pillars of a structure designed to protect power over truth. Madeline wasn't collateral damage. She was the cost of silence. Sarah realized she was outnumbered, but not alone. Bradley leaned in. If we take this to the state attorney, bypass the local chain, we might have a shot. But once we move, there's no going back. Sarah nodded. I never planned to. They met the assistant state attorney in a secured federal office the next morning. Sarah laid everything out, the confession, the letters, the falsified reports, the work logs, the surveillance footage. By the time she finished, the attorney's face was pale. This is a scandal waiting to explode, Sarah looked him in the eye. No. It already exploded. It just took 16 years for anyone to hear the sound. 2 days later, federal warrants were issued. Paul Kendrick was arrested for obstruction of justice and unlawful disposal of human remains. He went quietly. Rainer didn't. When officers arrived at his home, he barricaded himself inside, threatening to shoot anyone who came near. SWAT was called. Neighbors were evacuated. 4 hours, the standoff dragged on, tense, unbearable. Sarah stood at the perimeter, heart pounding. Then Rainer emerged. Alone. No weapons. Just years of fear carved into the lines of his face. He looked at Sarah across the tape line. "I tried to be a good man," he muttered. She didn't flinch. "Then you should have started with the truth." Chief Daniels was the last to fall. He denied everything, until the state subpoenaed his private emails and matched his handwriting to the letter Bradley had found. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he resigned in disgrace. Charges followed soon after. The entire town of Waverly reeled. The park was shut down indefinitely. A memorial went up where the swing set once stood, not to erase what had happened, but to finally acknowledge it. To speak her name. Madeline Harper. Sarah stood at the dedication ceremony, flanked by Bradley and Elaine Harper. The mayor read a statement of apology. The crowd bowed their heads. But it was Elaine who spoke last. She stepped up to the podium, trembling but unbroken. "For years, I begged for someone to listen," she said softly. "And no one did. But today, I don't see silence. I see truth. I see my daughter, not just buried beneath the playground, but rising above it." She placed a flower at the base of the stone. And for the first time in 16 years, she smiled. If you enjoyed this episode of Chase Studio Stories, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us continue to share impactful and meaningful content.